So my name is Stacy Young, and I'm what's called the Intensive Community Services Coordinator for Middle Peninsula and Northern CSB. So I work mostly with folks who are psychiatrically hospitalized, whether they're in the state hospital or whether they're in a local acute care. And I also work with the not guilty by reason of insanity population. But the main reason I'm here is I'm a proud mom to an almost 14-year-old, formerly known as Asperger's, ASPI, high functioning autism, whatever the catchphrase of the day is. I tell people, mom. So this kind of presentation and working with this group has special meaning for me in my own heart, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about it, because if you're anything like me right now as a mom or caregiver of any sort, it's a challenging time for us. So part of what I wanted to do is just talk about when the puzzle starts to fall apart, how do we pick up our pieces during the pandemic? Let's see here, make sure we can. So basically, you're going to see my PowerPoint has a lot of words on it. So that's for the visual people and for the archive. So that way information gets done. I won't necessarily read every slide to you, but basically we are in unprecedented times in our country and around the world in terms of pandemic. I mean, we reference the Spanish flu, we reference other things, but in terms of how people are going to deal with their mental health and deal with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we really don't have good historical information. So as providers, we've had to look to the historical perspectives of working with the World Trade Center towers, Ezekiel, mass shootings, and natural disasters such as hurricanes and tornadoes. And right now, I mean, our country literally has Hurricane Laura getting ready to pounce on it, which may be the worst hurricane ever. So we know mental health wise, there's a lot going on with people in our world and country. What we also know is anytime there's something like this going on, there's an increase in depression, most traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorders, anxiety, and other social issues such as domestic violence, child abuse, and animal cruelty. So this pandemic has literally brought out the best and worst in people. So some of our challenges, as I am preaching to the choir right now, I'm not exactly sure who's on this lunch, but I guarantee there's probably someone from every aspect. We are in a fractured system of healthcare right now. There's so many barriers on a good day, such as language, culture, systematic racism, inequalities, transportation. I'm in a very rural area. Like I mentioned, I serve 10 counties. I'm from the York to the Potomac. So I'm in the Gloucester, Middlesex, Lancaster, Northumberland area. There's truly no real public transportation to get our folks to services. So the other piece that's happened is traditional referral sources to mental health and or any other service provider, such as our schools and doctors' offices and things like that, really shut down during COVID. So we weren't getting the referrals we needed to catch people early on in their times of crisis. So many mental health facilities and private providers reduce their hours. We know for us, that is a huge hit. When the pandemic hit, everything closed down. We are now phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, depending on where you are. Services are starting to slowly re-limit and reopen to us. But those of us who rely on home-based services are still really struggling and still really challenged with our people going on. So what we have to do is provide services as we can and know. So what are we seeing? We're going to see higher levels of anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorders, suicidality, the PTSD, and social isolation and fear are two of the major factors with this. We're living in a world where possibly anyone could be a threat to us. Anyone could be a carrier of a virus, and it makes us more vulnerable. And vulnerable populations became even more vulnerable during this time. Families are struggling with what a new normal means. Substance abuse is on the rise, and countries have reported over 20% increase in symptoms. I did a really scientific poll during this when I kind of gave a speech like this earlier, and I just asked Facebook and social media, because those are the high-tech, really scientific journals out there of research. But I just asked people in general, how are you feeling during this? And I belong to a lot of the online autism support groups, and we all have our own chats, and many people just felt feeling really isolated and lonely and fearful, the lack of everyday structure and routine, not feeling like they could get the things that they needed every day, the stress from working from home or being unemployed, caregivers who were working outside of the home now having to stay at home, not having the supports come in, no motivation, crying. And when individuals seek medical care, they weren't always allowed to have visitors or loved one with us. Now, we know as caregivers, and depending on where the people you love are on the spectrum, we know that sometimes they have to have us with them, that there is no other option for them to go to a doctor's appointment alone, depending on what their needs are. And this complicated so many things. So, responses and observations. And most felt no motivation during the pandemic. They felt really socially isolated. In the beginning, probably just like you might have done a lot of the pandemic COVID projects. Well, after 2 weeks or so, that tends to fade off. Now we're in a whole level of school. Do we attend? Do we not attend? Virtual learning, work, home, and so on. So if you have a school-age child right now, as I do, I can't imagine what you're going through because so many things are wrapped up into our educational system. This could be an entire workshop on its own. It could be an entire conference, I think, on its own, but it's definitely creating a lot of anxiety, stress, and frustrations and fear and anger among people nationally. I know even personally, my son this week is supposed to start school on Monday. I've seen such an increase in his agitation, his anger, talking back. I started seeing more inability to emotionally regulate, and school hasn't even started yet. So the pieces of the puzzle, we kind of put them back together because let's face it, we're several months into the pandemic. We are the most resilient and resourceful people. We were putting our puzzle back together. Now it feels like our puzzle's coming apart again. So part of what we had to think about is how do we sustain during that? At first, a lot of people were really worried about the seriously mentally ill when the pandemic hit. However, what we quickly realized was that population is already, unfortunately, exceptionally isolated. Unlike what we're talking about, a lot of our folks are socially isolated as well. So we didn't see as much of the symptoms that we thought we might see with the more pervasively, chronically mentally ill folks, because their routines didn't really essentially change that much because they were already socially isolated. How does that apply to our puzzle, though, of support? So there were two populations when I started doing research on how the pandemic is affecting mental health and ID and DD populations. And when I say ID, I mean intellectually disabled. And when I say DD, developmentally disabled populations. And there was two things that I really saw was that the elderly and the ID-DD populations were dramatically impacted, but not necessarily televised as two populations that were. So one common issue was that we noticed that both groups lacked in-home supports or structured community during this time. Meals on Wheels for the elderly, respite day programming. For IDD folks, same sort of concept, in-home respite care, medical care for those who may have home nurse serving. The folks that had day programs, whether they were adult or children, the daycares were gone. Respite services, REACH, I think most people might be familiar with the REACH services in our area. The REACH programs were no longer going out and really doing face-to-face crisis interventions. So we went from this kind of highly structured support level of care, depending on what the person you care about's needs are. Like I don't have a lot of in-home supports. My son happens to be pretty high functioning, but I have friends who do, and basically their world kind of crumbled because all of a sudden the structure of care, the structure of support kind of disappeared. Now it's back half and half. Some are coming in, some are not coming in. Telemed has really kind of become the new wave of the future. Like us, we're on a Zoom chat right now. Historically, we might have been in a classroom or we might be doing other things. So what we saw was that these two populations became exceptionally high risk, and they were identified early on to be high risk to die from the virus. So I think thankfully we have seen that that didn't pan out the way that we originally anticipated, but it created a culture of fear that has still sustained us. It still makes us fearful to even go back out into the public. What we can see is that we're seeing higher rates of depression and suicide among the elderly, and they were already one of our highest rates of suicide in our nation and country. So unfortunately, I don't think that's changed too much, but part of that became disposable cultures came along with this concept of a pandemic, and the elderly became the biggest one. When there was a fight for ventilators, who was going to get ventilators? And we saw this in other countries, that they were not necessarily giving ventilators to the elderly. So when you started thinking about our folks and the elderly, it almost became like we were a disposable culture, like our culture abandoned us in some ways in our system of care. So being the people that we are, and we're incredibly resourceful, we figured out how to make it happen. So when our world feels out of control, what we saw, so one of the things I do is I also work emergency services for behavioral health. So we saw an increase in the agitation and violence among the folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities. I know this is not a shocker for anyone on this call who lives and works with someone. We saw the increasing in the self-harming behaviors such as headbanging, secondary to anxiety and changes in routine, and caregivers were often slighted for the reason, like, what's different? What happened this time? What's going on? What's the change in routine? Oh, well, Johnny or Sally or Susie or Jamal or whoever came is no longer coming. Also, the limited being able to limit use of technology. When you have someone with a lot of issues, they may not be able to do a Zoom chat. They may not be able to communicate their needs. So the huge changes in routine and structure, we saw an increase in agitation and violence. We saw a lot of our school-aged populations throughout the end of the school year, summer, and even going into now. I have another IEP meeting on Tuesday because we still can't figure out how to do the accommodations. And I know there's some other people out there like, I hear you. And I tend to use a little humor as a coping mechanism. So please, if I do offend someone, I apologize. It's my way of coping. I was like, come on, you know, school starts Monday. So our puzzle kind of came crashing down again. We put it back together and it comes crashing down again. Families in crisis definitely need these services. We need the in-home, we need the support, we need the resources. The mask issue, many families are struggling with the mask and caregivers. A lot of that is due to sensory issues, the potential harm from even chewing on the mask. As we know, some people are very orally fixated. Some people will just scratch at it. All the different issues that go along with wearing a mask. And let's get real. If you don't wear a mask right now, you're having a secondary impact of getting judged and criticized by many because now you're that threat again. Oh my goodness, you're out in the area. And not everybody wants to say, well, you know, my son, child, my adult, whoever my caregiver is, whoever my partner is, has sensory issues, and it makes it almost impossible to wear a mask. So here we are already, a lack of our social structure, our social support. Now we're struggling with, we have to deal with the secondary impact of society kind of judging us. So in some of these, unfortunately, we saw a rise in the need of hospitalization for some of our folks because the violence got so out of control. Caregivers were so exhausted. We saw property damage. We saw physical injuries. We saw caregiver depression. We saw law enforcement and mental health professional involvement. Then the families needing to make a plan. I know for me, one of the first things I did in March was, I'm an only parent. My son's father died when he was 5. So it's just him and I. And I was like, okay, what happens if I get sick? Because it's not like the cold or something else where you can maybe take your child and say, hey, can you go stay with someone else, or someone comes into your home? You're now talking about something that could be potentially life-threatening. And so many of us had to make these plans about a possible exposure or possible sickness with a child or an adult with complex needs. What happens if I get COVID? What happens if my person that I love and care for gets COVID? How am I going to take care of this? And again, another level of stress, especially when the hospitals were saying, you can't stay. You know, no wonder our world felt out of control. Some other things that are being impacted in our world due to the physical distancing and telehealth options, which have been wonderful in some ways, there have been some delays in formal diagnosis. There's been increased wait lists for services. Some places are trying to mitigate that by doing like video-based caregiver behavioral observations. They're handing out specific tools. They're doing screen and record behavior. They're doing more of the telehealth one-on-one if there's that capacity. So we are trying to mitigate. We are trying to do the workarounds. We are putting that puzzle back together because let's face it, we're like superhuman sometimes. We're like superheroes as caregivers and educators and as practitioners, whether you are medical or mental health practitioner. I'm not sure who else is on here. Teachers, right now, my heart goes out to you. If there are any of you on here, I would not want your job because you are doing the impossible, but yet you are doing it. You are figuring it out. We're finding ways to adjust pharmaceutical interventions quickly. Like I said, we just mentioned so many people were having this increased anxiety and depression. We know that the need for pharmaceutical interventions for some people is necessary. So we're able to try to figure that out. We struggled with access to particular foods or food brands. I know my son will go into complete meltdown if we don't have goldfish crackers. I know some of you are out there. If I said, what is the one food item you could not get at any point during this pandemic, you probably would be like, something comes to mind. I said, my son has a traditional chicken nugget pizza dining, menu and goldfish crackers. So I was stocking up on goldfish crackers when this first started happening. And I was like, people were like, what's going on? I'm like, you don't understand. For us, if we can't get certain things, our child may refuse to just flat out eat. And then it has all the other impacts that go with that. So and then they were limiting us. And I was like, you don't understand. I have to have certain things. There are certain items I got to have. And we're all competing for the same limited resource. The other thing we know is autistic youth and young adults have more emergency room visits and more primary and psychiatric visits and healthcare expenditures than other youth with special needs. I wish I could tell you where I saw that. I jotted it down, so I apologize. It might be in one of the articles that I've shared later. But the rates of complex mental health concerns such as depression, bipolar, ADHD, schizophrenia are more prevalent than the general population and increase with age with the folks that we serve. So not only are we dealing with complex issues around executive functioning skills, sensory diets, we're also dealing with these emergent medical and mental health issues. My son also struggles from some eating issues that affect how he digests food. It definitely creates an issue for so many people in an access. So again, we're left with all these puzzle pieces. What do we do? And as caregivers, we were kind of left to put it together with limited instructions. I say it's like we got the puzzle box with all the pieces, but we didn't get the picture on the front of the puzzle to use as a reference. It's like, okay, what are we trying to put together here? So we have lots of issues like we talked about, the loss of services, the loss of structures, the back to school, increased demands, increased stress levels, and caregivers are just like this. I mean, I'm just like this. I tell everybody, and like I said, I use humor as a joke. I went blonde because my gray was becoming so prevalent, and it just covers it better. It's a coping strategy. My hat goes off again. We could do the whole class again on school. However, I do think it's important to acknowledge that anyone right now has a school-age child. This is probably one of your largest, most immediate stressors. We don't know what the loss or gains are going to happen that are going to occur during this time. For some students, the virtual learning may be less stressful. It may be awesome. Like my son, who tends to have the defiant side of the autism, and I tend to get phone calls from school a lot, and I mean a lot, to come and get him. We may have less stress. We may be like, oh my goodness, this is wonderful. He's going to be more productive. We have some internal structures at home, less anxiety. For others, it may be more anxiety producing, the increased social isolation and social skills. I will say I have seen a lot of the social skills go backwards in the people that I know. And I've shared that with other parents. Parents are like, oh, I'm not, we don't have the play groups. We don't have the socialization groups. We're not able to practice our socialization skills. I'm just seeing some backsliding. Here's the bottom line. Our kids are resilient. The people we care for on the spectrum are some of the most resilient people out there. They bounce back from things that most people never would. So although we are at a school-age child, yes, we're going to have issues. Honestly, what we probably need to focus on is ourselves. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that coming up, because we need to be more resilient. No matter what the struggles, no matter what the anxiety and concerns are, these are all very present for us. And I tell people all the time, sometimes I can do better research than the FBI. And I know I am not the only one out there that is like that. Google is our friend. Researches, we make phone calls. We will find a way to get through this. But with that said, I don't know about anyone else. I tend to feel permanently exhausted these days. And I often kind of have to take that step and go. However, what I do know, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so anytime I can put a Princess Leia reference in, I'm going to do it. Again, Empire Strikes Back, go-to stress coping mechanism for me. But what we do is we do fight. We are the best advocates for the people we care about. We do resist when we get that pushback to just accept a lesser service, or maybe we table that for right now. I know for me, I kept getting really frustrated when people said, well, we need to table that for right now. I'm like, no, we don't. But we also are the people who find hope. We find hope like no one finds hope, because that's what we're best at. That's what we're good at. That's what we tend to do. We are good at finding the hope. We are good at finding the gold nuggets. We are the ones who celebrate successes more than the average bear, because that's what we do. So what is resiliency? So part of how we put our puzzle back together, how we move forward as we go into a continued state of disarray and uncertainty with this pandemic, is we really have to focus on our resiliency, not only with our people that we care for and we love, but also with ourselves as caregivers. So I want to make sure you know right now, I'm speaking from the heart as a mom who has really struggled in the last 2 weeks and had to follow my own professional advice, that we are resilient and we have to take care of ourselves. So basically, resiliency is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's about being tough, the ability for an object to spring back into shape. What I'm really talking about for a lot of us, though, is that psychological resilience, which is the ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis and return to a pre-crisis status quickly. And let's face it, since March, that's all we've been doing, is going in and out of some level of crisis with ourselves and probably with the people we love and the people around us. Resilience exists when a person uses your mental processes and behaviors in promoting personal assets and protecting themselves from the negative impacts of the stressors. And you gotta love Wikipedia. So it's just about basically regaining that sense of purpose and direction. When I don't know about anyone else, but when I have a plan, even if my plan's not great, my anxiety goes down and I'm like, okay, I can take this on. I now know what I've got to do to move forward. I now know I can pick up this piece of the puzzle and this piece of the puzzle, and I can start putting it back together. The puzzle's probably not going to get put back together anytime soon, very quickly, but at least if we can get the borders done. I know when I do a puzzle, a true puzzle, I work on the border edges. Then I start putting the pieces in the middle. And I would say for most of us, we probably have the border done because we've been operating in a pandemic for the last several months. But now it's like, how do we put the middle pieces in there? How do we get back to that sense of purpose, direction, and balance? Like I said, there's the 3 types of resilience. There's the psychological and emotional, how we're going to respond, the physical, how our bodies recover and heal. I don't know about you, but I think people have seen an increase in headaches. People have seen some body aches, not only with the folks that we care for, but again, those of us who are caregivers in our communities. How our community responds and comes back. Where the research of knowledge, again, is natural disasters, mass shootings, natural emergencies. To keep it current, Hurricane Laura is getting ready to hit the Gulf Coast. We know it may be one of the worst hurricanes ever to hit the country. And we will see people respond. Probably for the next 3 or 4 weeks, we will see an outpouring of monetary donations, support. We'll see people go down and help clean, and we're going to see all these things. We all know people will rally together as a community short term when something big happens. But we also know that those people's lives are never going to be the same for months to come. And that community changes and our community dissipates and grows depending on what's going on. We have to be the keepers of our community. It's one of the things that we struggle with sometimes is building community, but it's also one of our greatest strengths, because when we do build a community, it tends to be strong, it tends to be resilient, and it tends to be unshakable. And I apologize if you can hear that background noise. It always seems to happen when I'm trying to do something important. So when we talk about the 7 C's, this is for youth and children. It can be for young adults as well, about helping promote resiliency in the people we work with. But as I said, anything can be applied to me. Having a sense of control. We know already that when we can provide an opportunity that gives people control, they tend to feel more centered. So sometimes it's even giving someone a choice, like, again, to use my son, he tends to have the basic autism diet, as I kind of joke, is chicken tenders and pizza, let's say, for example. Even just giving the choice, which one do you want? Anything where we can give people options, it gives a sense of control back in our lives. You want to sit down. Do you want to sit down here, or do you want to sit down there? And again, I think many of us do this naturally, especially teachers, to help manage classrooms. But sometimes when we're stressed, we forget to go back to our basics. And so part of what I want to do is remind us that sometimes we just have to go back to that basic level of resiliency, that basic level of regaining control, because that's how we're going to continue to put our puzzle together. When we are out of control, it's hard for us to focus on anything productive because we become reactive. So we want to move from that reactive place to that productive place. Competence, ask questions, become familiar with the problem, seek knowledge. Again, we are amazing at that. Coping, know what your own coping strategies are. Be willing to learn new ones. I love to exercise. Gyms were closed during the pandemic. Okay, so what else can I do? Go for a walk. Figure out what your coping skills are. Don't become socially isolated. Zoom has been one of these amazing things. It's really brought some people together. Although it may not be the personal platform, it's been able to bring people together and still say socially connected. Confidence, do what works, do what you're good at, do it when you can, and help someone else with it. Like if you know you're great at IEP meetings, or you know you're a great advocate, then do it, help others. Find a way to really capitalize on what you're good at. My son is amazing with politics. I could care less. So guess what? I put him in charge of, hey, research these candidates for me. Whatever it is, everybody's good at something. Find out what it is. Connection, again, social isolation breeds depression. We have to mitigate the gap. Find a way to express your feelings. Try to stay connected. Encourage those that we work with and we love and live with to do the same. Even if it's text messaging, drawing, artwork is a great medium for some people if it is safe and capable of doing. Again, I know people range from really medically complex and maybe not able to do those types of resources to those who are on the more other end of the functionings and can do a lot of things. Character. Explore your values, learn who you are. What else, what do you want to do? It's a great time to do some introspection and self-work. And then again, contributions. How can you help to make others? So 5 key stress resilient skills. Be self-aware. As a caregiver, I cannot emphasize this enough. Be self-aware. Know how your body reacts. Know your thoughts. Know your feelings. I put myself in timeout sometimes. I'm like, I got to take a break. It's okay for us right now to have more, to feel like there's more on our plate than normal, because there is. So I try to tell my fellow caregivers, it's okay to say you're having a bad day. It's okay to sometimes say autism sucks. It's okay sometimes to say, I don't know how I'm going to do this, or I don't know how I'm going to get through the day. And it's okay sometimes to just cry. Pay attention, your flexibility, maintaining focus. Again, be mindful. I try to remind myself, I just have to get through this day. I just have to get through this moment sometimes. Letting go of your physical tension, muscle tension, exercise, yoga, deep breathing, meditation, whatever it takes. My son calls it a potion. I have a diffuser at night with all the allergies going on, and I'll put eucalyptus and things in there. And he's like, Mom, can I just have some of the potion right now? Because it calms him. So whatever your body sense needs to be, the weighted blankets have been our friend since COVID hit. Being able to sit on the couch and watch a movie and have that weighted blanket. But whatever you need to do to help relax physically and also let go of that tension. Also let go mentally. Be able to separate what is keeping you stuck, what is keeping you challenged, what is unhelpful right now. Accept that some things we're just not going to change. Like again, using the school. There are just some things that are out of our control, but seem to impact us so much. But focus on what you can change. Focus on what you do have control of. Remember, you have options. I tell people hope. When you give options, it breeds hope. When you have 2 options, you have a dilemma. You're like, okay, it's this or this. When you have 3 or more options, you have choice, and choice breeds hope. So try to identify what your options are as you're moving forward. They may not be the best options, but 3 or more options tend to breed hope. So again, balance the body, mind, positive emotions. Find those other caregivers. If you don't know people locally, reach out to support groups. Reach out to this program. I'm sure they can put you connected with other people. When I first got the diagnosis, I didn't really know who to talk to. And I reached out and I just said, I need another caregiver to talk to because I'm grieving. And I had so many emotions. During this pandemic, it's another time where a lot of things can get brought up. And especially if you have multiple people in the home with multiple competitions going on. Build your resilience, kind of stuff I just said. Learn to sit with yourself. It's okay to be uncomfortable. We tend to be the fixers, especially caregivers, teachers, professionals. We're fixers. You would not be on this lunch if you were not a fixer on some level. But it's okay sometimes to be able to say, I don't know how to fix it, and be okay with the uncomfortability of saying, I don't know how to make it right, but I'm going to continue to try to make it right. Do your self-care. Make plans with friends or in general. Still find ways to stay connected. Make time for gratitude. I know that's a huge piece for me. And even our kiddos, the people we care about, our young adults, again, whomever may be in your life that's on the spectrum right now, there's something they're grateful for. And I know I try to say, what are you grateful for? Even if it's the fact that I got those goldfish crackers and I may have 20 boxes of them now and I'm good for the next 4 months, I'm grateful because you know what? That's one less stress. But I might say, what am I grateful for? I'm grateful for today that it didn't rain. Or I might say, I'm grateful for the phone call that I got. Today, I'm grateful that I have an opportunity to present to you all. It's such a complete honor. So that is on my gratitude list for today. Allow yourself again to feel the things that you need to feel. Grieve, angry, worry, anxious. Just don't stay stuck there, because we know that that's when we get stuck, everyone else around us gets stuck. What can we do? Eat healthy and stay hydrated. I will be the first one to tell you I put on a COVID-10. Cool Ranch Doritos became my friend. I'm actually getting back on on track. So if you did that, do not beat yourself up. It is okay. I am with you. I raise my hand. But eat healthy, stay hydrated, exercise, stretch, yoga, know your resources, keep reaching out, have facts, have a plan. Take a break from watching the news and social media. Let's face it, right now, there's not a whole lot of positivity on there. Or if you're going to be on social media, be the voice of positivity. Maintain a routine, your wake up, bedtime, eating. That was probably one of the hardest things when school closed for us, was to maintain a routine, and then with me working at home. So maintain those routines. As school again changes, for those of you with school age folks, it's going to be important to still maintain a routine. For those of you who maybe have lost a day programming option or daycare option, those routines are so important. Get enough sleep. I cannot emphasize enough, when you are exhausted, not only emotionally, but physically, you cannot make good decisions, and you go into a reactive place of response versus a proactive. Get the rest that you need. Get outside when possible. Connect with others, like we said, whether it's through online meeting platforms, video conferencing, Google, Skype, whatever. Read, journal, create art, find a hobby. But read stuff that's also just for fun. I'm sure there's a few of you out there that I'm speaking to that says you don't have to read every resource book and every book on the spectrum or how to take care of stuff. You can give yourself a break and read something fun. It is still summer, so take advantage of that. Focus on the priorities. What is the most important? Manage your time, find the balance, find ways to be accountable to others. And all of these same things are the same things that we need to be doing with the people we serve. We got to remember that everybody we work with is a holistic being. And find your spiritual path, whatever that may be. And by all means, laugh. We have to find time to laugh. If we don't laugh, then we're going to be struggling, because laughter is the biggest stress relief that we have. We're making history right now, and I can continue to talk, but I don't know if there's questions, so I want to make time. We're making history right now. We are learning a new normal, a new way of being. We're moving from a struggling and thriving to a changing in what's happening. Although many may be struggling with the mental health or our kids on the spectrum that are having some issues, there's still hope. There's still purpose. There is help. We are going to survive this. We are going to build our sense of community. We are going to go from a place of maybe despair to resiliency. What are you doing for your self-care? How are you practicing and fostering resiliency? Again, I wanted to give time for some questions. If not, I have some other things that I can still talk about. We can and will put the puzzle back together. It's what we do. It's how we move forward, because this is who we are. I will know from our community service board is starting to actually go out and do home visits. I know other places are out and doing home visits. I know they're attending IEP meetings. So our puzzle is starting to come back together. It just may be not the same way we want it to be. I wanted to give some hotlines locally as well. Some numbers if you're concerned about anyone who is suicidal or might need care. Obviously 911. I put our area, I cover 10 counties in the Middle Peninsula, but that's our COPE line. Other places have local hotlines as well. REACH, which is for IDDD individuals across the state. So they're a great resource for individuals as well. There's also called the Warm Line of Virginia that's available. It's peer run. So if you know somebody who just wants to talk to someone. Some other lines, disaster distress hotline, veterans hotline, the Trevor Project for LGBTQ youth. There's a study that shows a lot of our folks on the autism spectrum. There's some more studies showing that a lot of them are having issues with gender identifications. So we also know that that is one of the highest populations to attempt to commit suicide is LGBTQ youth, sorry. And again, with our individuals that we work with coming out and having a disability, is two things and two barriers that often can be really socially isolating on a good day. So I wanted to make sure people had those resources available as well. Domestic violence, like I said, and some other things like that. Here's some of the articles that I kind of read and referenced. I will be honest, I've read several things. It's sort of been a little passion of mine about mental health and how autism's been doing during the pandemic, because it's sort of unprecedented times, but there's some of the references there. So I wanted to take a few minutes for questions if there was some, because I think you told me to leave like 10 minutes or so for questions, right? She's giving me the yes, because I tend to teach 2-hour classes. So I was like, okay, I got to break it down.
Stacy, thank you so much. That was so powerful and inspiring. And you know, there's some comments in here that people just want to know more about this, that thank you, this is really helping me out. One person's son has been on Zoom meetings with his music class once a week, and he enjoys it and brings him a sense of normalcy. And I completely agree with that.
I agree, yeah.
But if anyone has any questions for Stacy, please put them in the chat box so I can share them with her. You know, I just sent an email to a group of folks saying you have to fill your cup before you can help others. And what is in your cup? What makes your cup full? And you know, you mentioned some really great strategies and exercise and taking care of yourself, and I couldn't agree more. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I'm very transparent. Like I said, I kind of wear two hats here as a mental health professional, but I was very honest even with my supervisor. My son is capable to stay home alone. I'm one of those very, very blessed people. But when we stayed together too much, it increased our level of crisis escalation, honestly, because I was trying to work, he was trying to do things. And I finally just had a conversation with my boss and I said, hey, can I like go into my office a couple days a week? And I joked, I said, because I can't afford bail money. But I said, honestly, we're not good for each other working together at the same time. And it wasn't fair to him because of what I do in HIPAA. It wasn't fair to him to have to sit in another room or be quiet all the time. And at the same time, as a one-income family, I had to work. So my heart, like literally, like I get it when families are like, I don't know what to do because I have to work, but I also have to be home. And I have a friend who does pre-K special needs classrooms. And as she said, I don't know how I'm going to do this virtually because I'm going to have to rely on the parents or caregivers to set up a video. And I'm trying to teach kids how to hold a fork. How am I going to do that visually? Like you have to, or hold a pen or hold up a color card. And she's like, you know, so many of them have the physical sensory issues and the fine motor issues. She's like, I don't know how I'm going to do that. And I've just seen so many people struggle. But you know what that's also told me is so many people's hearts are so generous. And if anything, it taught me how much people truly do care for this population, and that their struggle in not being able to serve is just as much as our struggle in not being able to receive. And that's
really
been
great
important
point
for me when I've been at IEP meetings, because, you know, I've wanted to be like the parent. And I'm like, you know what? They're just as impacted in their inability to provide the service as I am in receiving it. And sometimes
sorry.
No, go.
Someone said this was an excellent class. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. And then we do have a question. Any suggestions on my early 20s high-functioning autism son who refuses to wear a mask? This prevents him from going into the store, indoor area, or social gathering, as everywhere around us mandates mask use. He and I take walks outside, but it's just us two.
So I will tell you one thing that I will say we've done historically for something else that may work. I made a business card that I show people when I used to go to, my son loves history, so we would go to reenactments. And he did the typical thing, and I would wear my ribbon often to the museums, and because I tend to be an educator at heart. But when my son would do this, when, you know, the look down, the classic look down when he's really hyper focused. So I made a business card that basically said, I have high functioning autism, loud noises and crowds make me very nervous. I may be looking away, but I'm really paying attention. Because he was like, Mom, do you really have to tell everybody all the time? Like, you know, he's like, I'm so embarrassed. So one of the things is you might be able to use a business card, because technically they cannot refuse you access if it's an accommodation for a disability. They're not supposed to be able to do that. And if you show them and say, look, you know, my child has, or my young adult has a disability that precludes them from wearing a mask. Now, some of your small private stores still may do that, but some of your more public spaces and public venues don't have to, they're supposed to allow you as an accommodation. So that's one way where you don't have to explain it, but you may have like just a business card that basically says, hey, or my son may wear it limited. Like I may walk into it, but I can't promise that he's going to keep it on. I'm sure you've looked at, I've bought my son several different kinds of masks so that he, depending on what day, might feel more comfortable. Depending on what your child is interested. Some people have really liked taking on like the characters and different things like that to help make the mask more enjoyable, part of their persona, you know. So if there's, you know, a cartoon character or a particular thing, but I've done several different kinds of masks, and it's kind of like us with toothbrushes, depending on the day. There's a variety of toothbrushes we might use. It may be the same thing with the mask, but I think one of the easiest things would be like a card that you can hand or show someone at the door that says, look, you know, and if you Google the ADA regulations, that sometimes helps if you kind of cite that, because it gives a, you know, not that again, I'm trying to be like a rawr about it, but it does sometimes give a little rawr. Hey, this is Americans with Disability Act. You would not make someone have to walk in that's in a wheelchair. So that's a suggestion that, and maybe others on here have other suggestions.
That's a really great point. I like both of those. One, the card, and I've used that myself with clients that I've been with. But there are so many different types of masks, and there's the gator mask, and there's ones that don't go behind your ears, and Tommy Copper or Tommy whatever. I just saw one on TV that is adjustable and it goes behind your ears, but not all the way or behind your head, which I think is fantastic too. So
there's some with Velcro now that actually don't even go behind your ears. They'll just Velcro behind. And then the fabrics, as we all know, fabrics tend to be a really huge sensory trigger. So finding something that has a really soft, comfortable, breathable fabric. And that's why, again, I bought different masks for different things, because I know his sensory, my son tends to be a sensory seeker and a sensory avoider all at the same time. So depending on where his level is, and his mask may change throughout the day. We may start off in one and end in a different one.
Someone mentioned, I would recommend two, letting him choose the mask or try one that covers the face but not attached. Also contact the store ahead of time. Oh, that's a good point. So everyone's saying, thank you for this helpful information.
Aww.
The chat is helpful for other people, question answers, bring information forward. Yep.
And any feedback, I'm one of these people, like if, you know, I get to do this again, I would love any constructive feedback or anything that I could cover more or do better. I knew I had about 45 minutes, so I was trying to crunch a bunch in and leave time for discussion and questions. So any feedback you guys have for me, I have my email down there. Happy to do what I can, be a resource, would love to make it better.
And Stacey, you'll send me the PowerPoint so we can post it, right? Awesome,
Yes,
thank you so much.
Yep. I was waiting until after this in case there was something I needed to add or somebody had something with it, and I would be like, okay, let me add that before I post it.
Well, again, this has been fantastic, and we really, really appreciate you. Someone said, thanks so much. Great to hear from a parent. Flexibility is important too. very informative. Thank you for the post as well. Everyone's really happy. Thank you so much.
Well, this was the highlight of my day, so.
Yay. All right, thank you. And everyone, thank you so much for being here this week, and look out for the listserv post about what is going to be up for next week. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.